Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive.
Always.
This time we're going up, way up, into the world of aviation.
Okay.
But not just like the planes and the tech and all of that.
Right.
We're really focusing on the human factor.
The pilot.
Yeah, you gave me a whole stack of, training manuals, reports.
Mm-hmm.
I think there might even be some stories from pilots in here.
Oh, yeah.
And we're going to figure out just how much things like, fatigue,
Sure.
stress, even like illusions, sensory things,
Yeah.
affect what happens in the cockpit.
It's so easy to think about the planes and the technology,
Right.
but ultimately it all comes down to the human at the controls.
Yeah.
And there's so much to cover, like how our bodies react at high altitudes, or even how different learning styles can impact how well a crew works together.
Okay, so first up then, high altitude.
Okay.
I mean, we all know like oxygen is pretty important, but these sources, they actually get down into the nuts and bolts of how our bodies are affected when we're miles above sea level.
Yeah, it all comes down to pressure, really. As you go higher, the atmospheric pressure drops, and that directly affects how much oxygen we can absorb.
Makes sense.
And then there's this fascinating concept called time of useful consciousness, or TUC.
TUC.
It's basically the amount of time you have to act before the lack of oxygen, hypoxia,
Right.
renders you basically incapable.
Yeah, the source actually gives this like pretty terrifying example.
Oh, yeah.
At 30,000 feet
Okay.
during a rapid decompression.
Wow.
Your TUC could be as little as 30 seconds.
That's not a lot of time.
No, like barely enough time to put on your,
Your oxygen mask.
Yeah, so those oxygen masks that drop down,
Oh, yeah.
not just for show.
No, they are absolutely vital, along with the pressurized cabins, of course.
Right.
That's how we keep the environment safe up
For
there.
everybody.
For the crew and the passengers.
Yeah, and speaking of keeping, performing at your peak,
Yeah.
the sources also highlight something that I think is really easy to overlook.
What's that?
Just the general health and hygiene of pilots.
Oh, right. Yeah, especially on long-haul flights.
Right. I mean, in a way, pilots are almost like athletes, right?
Absolutely. They need to be in top shape to perform at their best.
Yeah. So even things we might not think about a lot.
Yeah.
Like
what?
like managing chronic conditions, or even just being super careful about food and water safety when they're in different parts of the world.
Yeah.
It can actually make a big difference in how well they can do their jobs.
It all adds up.
And there's this one kind of surprising fact that I came across.
Okay.
The effects of alcohol are way stronger at altitude.
Oh, wow.
2 or 3 times stronger than at sea level.
Really?
Yeah. So just imagine that. Like one drink before takeoff could hit you way harder
Yeah.
once you're up in the air.
It's a good reminder that those small choices can have big consequences up at altitude.
For sure.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to something else I
Yeah.
think we can all relate to.
I?
Stress. Yeah.
Jeez.
Feeling overwhelmed.
Absolutely.
But these sources really lay out how stress impacts pilots.
Yeah.
It's not just like feeling frazzled or whatever. It's like it actually affects them physically and mentally.
Right. It's a real physiological and cognitive thing. One source I was reading actually described this general adaptation syndrome, GAS, they call it.
GAS.
Yeah, it's about how our bodies deal with stress, like in stages. First, there's the initial alarm, fight or flight.
Mm-hmm.
And then if that stress keeps going, you can eventually get to a point of just total exhaustion, even burnout.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it affects your brain too. Like it can make it harder to make good decisions,
Right.
mess with your memory, even lead to those moments where your mind just goes blank.
Like you just forget a procedure you've done 1,000 times.
Exactly. There's this one pilot story I read. He was trying to land in some really bad crosswinds, super stressful situation. And he said he totally blanked on what the right flap settings were.
Oh, gosh.
It was a real wake-up call. Even for someone highly trained, stress can have a huge impact.
Yeah, and it makes you really appreciate that pilots are trained to recognize and manage stress, right?
Absolutely.
Like with things like action coping,
Mm-hmm.
actually taking steps to solve the problem.
Right.
And cognitive coping, which is more like adjusting your mindset
Yeah.
to deal with the stress.
Really important skills. So it's not just about managing stress, like in general, right? It's about understanding how our minds work, how we process all that information.
Especially in a fast-paced environment like flying a plane.
Exactly. Like even when there isn't some huge stressful event, our brains still have limits.
Right.
Yeah.
You can only handle so much at once.
Exactly. And one source really broke down this whole process of human information processing. They call it HIP?
HIT.
Yeah, and they break it down into these stages like sensory input, perception, then making a decision, and then actually executing, doing the thing.
So it's like a whole chain reaction kind of thing.
Yeah, a chain reaction where each link could have a weak spot.
And I noticed the sources talked a lot about like the limitations of short-term memory.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Like we can only hold a few things in mind at once for a short time.
And that's why pilots use techniques like chunking.
Chunking, like what do you mean?
It's like when you're trying to remember a phone number, you break it up into smaller chunks, right?
Right, yeah, makes it easier.
Same idea. Pilots will chunk together complex procedures or checklists into more manageable pieces.
But even with those tricks, you're saying errors can still slip through.
Oh, yeah, for sure. The sources talked about these things called environment capture and action slips.
Okay, those sound kind of spooky, almost like our brains are working against us or something.
In a way, yeah, like with environment capture, it's like when your brain just goes on autopilot
Uh-huh.
and you end up doing something automatically that you shouldn't.
So like, I don't know, putting the car keys in the fridge or something.
Yeah. Well, yeah, something like that, but more like there's this pilot story in one of the sources where he accidentally taxied to the wrong runway.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because he'd been using the same route every day for years, even though he knew consciously that this flight was different.
So his brain was just like on autopilot going through the motions.
Exactly. And then there's action slips, which is more about like messing up the order of steps in something you do all the time.
Okay.
One source gave the example of like putting the milk in the cupboard.
And the cereal and the fruit.
Exactly. Like your brain is just so used to the routine, it kind of skips a beat.
Okay, well, that's funny when it's the milk and cereal,
Right.
but not so funny when you're in a cockpit, right?
Yeah.
So how do pilots, like, prevent these things from happening?
Well, a big part of it is training and awareness. Like they're taught to recognize those situations where these slips might happen. And they're constantly cross-checking each other
To catch any mistakes before they,
before they become a bigger problem.
Yeah, so we've got these physical limitations at high altitudes, stress messing with our brains, and now these, like, almost subconscious errors.
It's a lot to think about.
It really makes you appreciate, like, all the things pilots have to deal with beyond just, the technical stuff.
For sure, and it doesn't end there.
Oh, no. Oh, what else?
Well, our senses, our own eyes and ears, can actually deceive us, which can lead to, like, spatial disorientation and illusions, especially in flight.
You mean like those optical illusion pictures where the lines look all wonky?
Yeah, kinda, but it's more about how our brains interpret the information they're getting.
Okay.
So there's this thing called the symmetrographic illusion.
There's metagravic.
Yeah, basically when you accelerate, it can feel like you're tilting backwards, even if you're flying level.
So it's like your inner ear, the thing that helps you balance, is giving you the wrong information.
Exactly. It's sending mixed signals, and then there's the oculigeral illusion.
What's that one do?
Well, if you've been spinning for a while, it can make you feel like you're still turning, even after you've stopped.
Oh, that sounds really disorienting.
It can be really dangerous, too, which is why pilots are trained to rely on their instruments, not just what their senses are telling them.
Yeah, trust the instruments.
Exactly, because those illusions, they really highlight how important clear communication is in the cockpit.
Absolutely.
Like, you need to make sure everyone understands what's happening. You can't just rely on your own perception, which might be faulty.
Right. And speaking of communication, the sources really drill down on how vital it is in aviation.
Oh, yeah. It can be even more important than technical skill sometimes.
Yeah, because that's how pilots share information, coordinate everything they're doing.
Exactly. It's how they prevent those misunderstandings that could turn into something really serious.
Like one source had this crazy story about a miscommunication about takeoff power.
Oh, wow.
It almost led to a disaster. They caught it in time, thankfully, but still.
It makes you realize how much depends on clear, standardized language.
Absolutely, but it's not just the words.
Right.
No.
It's also how you say it.
Your tone of voice.
Yeah, or like being assertive versus being passive. All those things can affect how the information is received.
It makes you wonder if, like, different personality types or even cultural backgrounds could make things more complicated.
Oh, for sure. That's why it's so important to understand different communication styles and to practice active listening. Like really making sure you're understanding what the other person is saying.
So creating that environment where everyone feels comfortable speaking up.
Exactly, and asking questions if something isn't clear.
Okay, so we've talked about, like, the challenges of the human element in aviation, the limitations, the potential for errors, the need for clear communication.
Right.
But what about all the new technology in cockpits? How does that fit in?
Well, that's where things get even more complex because automation, while it's designed to make things safer and more efficient,
Right.
it actually introduces a whole new set of challenges from a human factors perspective.
But I can see that. Like, I can imagine if the autopilot's doing most of the work, it'd be easy to get complacent.
Exactly. The sources really emphasize how over-reliance on automation can be dangerous.
Hmm.
Pilots have to stay engaged. They need to understand how these systems work and what to do if they don't work.
So it's not just like knowing how to program the autopilot.
No, it's about understanding what's happening behind the scenes, being able to take over if something goes wrong.
Right, because at the end of the day, technology is a tool.
Exactly.
It can't replace human skill and judgment.
And all of this really connects to how pilots learn and adapt to these new systems.
Right, and that brings us to this whole learning pilot concept.
Yeah, there's a section in one of the sources about different learning styles.
So, like, are you saying some pilots learn best by doing while others are more theoretical?
Exactly. The source talks about Kolb's learning cycle, which has these 4 stages: experience, reflection, conceptualization, and then experimentation.
It's like some people jump right in and learn by doing,
Yeah.
while others prefer to analyze and plan things out first.
Yeah.
Wow, so all these different learning styles, different ways people process information.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that, we've got technology becoming more and more complex.
Yeah.
It feels like understanding the human factor, like it's only going to become more important in aviation, right?
Absolutely. All the sources really hammered that point home, like the future of aviation safety.
Right.
It's not just about the technology.
It's about the people.
Yeah, it's about how we understand and adapt and improve human performance because it's a demanding environment.
No kidding. And,
Yeah.
thinking about all these different learning styles,
Uh-huh.
it makes me wonder, like, what's the best way to put together a cockpit crew? Like, if you have one pilot who's all about hands-on experience,
Right.
and then another one who's more, likes to analyze everything,
Mm-hmm.
could that lead to, like, conflict?
It could, but I think the key is recognizing and valuing those differences.
Yeah.
Like one source actually suggests that having a mix of learning styles in the cockpit, it can be a huge advantage as long as everyone understands their own strengths and weaknesses
Uh-huh.
and the strengths and weaknesses of the other people on the crew.
So it all comes back to communication again?
Absolutely. It's about open communication, leveraging those different perspectives.
Yeah, we've talked about communication a lot. And I'm seeing a pattern here.
What's that?
It's not just about what each individual pilot can do.
Right.
It's about how they work together, how the whole team functions.
Exactly. And that team extends beyond the cockpit too, right?
Oh, yeah.
You've got air traffic control, maintenance crews, everyone plays a role.
It really is this whole interconnected system. And,
Yeah.
thinking about all these human factors,
Mm-hmm.
it makes me realize that even as passengers, we have a part to play,
What do you mean?
like being aware of potential delays,
Mm.
listening to instructions from the crew,
Yeah.
just generally being respectful of like this complex system that's getting us where we need to go.
Absolutely. We're all part of it.
Yeah, it's a team effort. And I think a little bit of understanding goes a long way.
I agree. It's easy to forget that when you're just sitting on a plane.
Totally. Okay, so big picture,
Mm-hmm.
what does all this mean for the future of aviation? We've covered so much, from like the science of breathing at 30,000 feet
Right.
to the psychology of decision-making when everything's going crazy.
It's complex.
It really is, but if there's one takeaway, what would it be?
Well, I think it's that human factors are completely inseparable from aviation safety.
Okay.
Like, no matter how advanced technology gets, we can't forget about the human element.
Right, it's this constant balancing act
Yeah.
between using those amazing tools,
Mm-hmm.
but also making sure our own skills and judgment stay sharp.
Exactly. It takes continuous learning and adaptation and really respecting the role that humans play.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive,
It really has.
and we've only just scratched the surface.
You could spend hours talking about each of these topics.
Oh yeah, easily. But for our listeners out there, whether you're a seasoned traveler or just curious about flying, I hope this has given you a new appreciation for the human side of aviation.
Maybe even sparked an interest in learning more about it.
Absolutely, and as always,
Safe travels, everyone.
From first officer to captain, master your airline command course. Are you ready to shatter the skies and take your aviation career to the next level? Whether you're just starting out or aiming for your airline command, Captain James is your ultimate co-pilot for success. With over decades of experience in both the Air Force and top airlines, Captain James has flown everything from fast jets and the P-3 to the Boeing and the Airbus, racking up countless hours in the sky. His unmatched insider knowledge and thrilling cockpit stories are packed into his best-selling Professional Airline Pilot series and his Skycall YouTube podcast. Buckle up. It's time to fly high. What you'll get is the Airline Command Prep course. You'll master the technical know-how, the standard operating procedures, and the leadership skills needed to take command of any flight. Next is the Airline Pilot Interview Manual. Nail your interview with insider tips, real-world scenarios, and expert strategies that will make you the top to pick. And finally, aircraft-specific guides that cover 600+ technical questions for every aircraft. Become a pro on both the Airbus and Boeing. Get ready to impress with your technical knowledge and join Captain James on his Skycall YouTube podcast for exclusive behind-the-scenes access to the aviation world. From interview hacks to emergency handling, airline operations, and real stories from the flight deck. This is your personal seat in the cockpit. It's time to level up your skills and knowledge with expert insights and answers to your most burning aviation questions. Start your journey now with Captain James's books on Amazon Kindle. The QR code is on the screen and the links are below. This is your first-class ticket to a successful aviation career. Become the pilot you were meant to be, with Captain James by your side.